Oh my God, what was that?
It sounds like a monster. I think we're getting close.
We're driving through the small town of Thetford, Vermont, right on the eastern edge of the state. It's wooded and rural, not too many houses. It's a small town.
So, Ray, what do you call a blind dinosaur?
What?
Do you think he saw us?
Oh no, dad jokes? Is this what we've come to?
What do you get when you cross a dinosaur with a pig?
What?
Jurassic pork?
All right, listen, there must be a better way to pass the drive time, Jeff.
Well, like I said before, we're getting close. We're almost at our destination, which is the Post Mills Airport.
Oh, we taking a plane somewhere?
No. We're looking for a prehistoric monster that lives here. One unique to the Green Mountain State. We're on the hunt for the Vermontasaurus. Hello, I'm Jeff Belanger, and welcome to episode 205 of the New England Legends podcast. If you give us about 15 minutes, we'll give you something strange to talk about today.
And I'm Ray Auger. Thanks for joining us on our mission to chronicle every legend in New England one story at a time. We're a community of legend seekers who love finding and sharing the strange tales that make New England unique. We appreciate your help. Please subscribe to our podcast because, well, it's free. And please consider posting a review for us on Apple Podcasts.
Yes.
It takes just a second, and it helps others find us.
You should also download our free New England Legends smartphone app. It links you to every location we've ever covered. And check out the New England Legends super secret Facebook group, now over 4,000 members strong. There's a bunch of us in there sharing these local legends, sharing funny memes, and connecting with others.
All right, listen, before we go looking for dinosaurs, we want to take just a minute to thank our Patreon patrons. For years now, this group has been the backbone of our show. They help with hosting costs, production and marketing costs, and all of those extra things we do to keep the community growing. For just $3 per month, they get early access to new episodes, plus bonus episodes and content that no one else gets to hear. If you can help, please head over to patreon.com/New England Legends to sign up.
Okay, Ray, if I were to ask, what's the greatest dinosaur movie of all time, we would say in unison,
Jurassic Park.
Of course. Who can forget the 1993 classic film?
There it is. Welcome to Jurassic Park. We've made living biological attractions so astounding that they'll capture the imagination of the entire planet.
A classic movie franchise created by Steven Spielberg that examines the exploits of fictional eccentric billionaire John Hammond.
Played by Richard Attenborough.
Hammond buys an entire island, extracts some ancient dinosaur DNA, and begins to genetically recreate herds of dinosaurs. The idea is to sell tickets to people who can come see these ancient monsters from millions of years ago. I mean, what could go wrong?
What could go wrong indeed? If you've seen any of the Jurassic Park movies, we get to see exactly what can go wrong. Now, the reason I brought up Jurassic Park is because I'm afraid this same story may be playing out right now in this small Vermont town. This is the place where an eccentric local man has brought dinosaurs back from extinction.
Weird. Okay, I can see Post Mills Airport coming up on the right. The airport is basically an airstrip for small planes and other aircraft.
Okay, we'll pull in right over here. And oh my God!
What in the world is that? It's huge. It's a monster. It's over 160 feet long. It's tall, and it's made of, it looks like countless pieces of wood. It's a giant wooden dinosaur right next to the runway.
That is the Vermontasaurus. To find out how it got here, let's travel back to 2008.
It's March of 2008, and there's been a lot of Vermont snow falling on the wooded museum building located at the Post Mills Airport. Too much snow. So much snow that the building collapses. Thankfully, the museum was closed and no one is hurt. But still, there's a mess of broken wood.
Meanwhile, more than 9,000 miles away in New Zealand, the owner of the building, Brian Boland, lies in a hospital bed. Boland is a hot air balloon pilot and a pioneer in experimental balloons. Anyway, he just suffered injuries after falling off a cliff, and he's pretty loopy on medication. When he takes the phone call, he's assured that they've covered the museum building with a tarp, and there's no need to cut his trip short by months just to tend to this. Boland tells his employees that once spring comes, to take down the structure and put the wood into two piles. Any wood that can be salvaged should go into one pile, and anything that's completely shattered can go into another.
It's May when Brian Boland returns to Post Mills Airport. Pretty quickly, he has the museum building rebuilt. But when he's finished, it's November, and there's now a big pile of wood sitting by the runway from the old museum. A pile of wood that sits there for over a year. A pile of wood that almost looks like kind of a giant beast.
Yeah.
Locals figured he would have a big community bonfire. That's when Boland says,
"That's not a burn pile. Those are dinosaur bones."
At this point, let's bring in Brian.
I'm Brian Boland. I built the Vermontasaurus, but I built it with the help from a lot of friends.
You claim those were dinosaur bones and not wood scraps. So what happens next?
Word got out real quick that Brian's going to build an enormous dinosaur. And the Valley News picked up on it. So they said, "What's with this dinosaur thing?" And I said, "Well, I've got all this scrap wood, and we're going to build this dinosaur."
Brian not only had the scrap wood from his old collapsed museum building, but he also had a bunch of wood from the old Post Mills mill building that had been torn down. When they heard about Brian's project, they delivered their scraps. And now the wood pile is 3 times larger than it was. The plan is to build a 120-foot wooden dinosaur.
We're going to make a 10-day project out of it, and I'm going to try and get a whole bunch of volunteers because it's going to be a really dynamic, quick effort.
So the Valley News is going to run a story, and they ask if there's an architectural plan for the project.
There isn't.
They ask if there's some kind of drawing or anything to go by.
I backed up and I looked up on this beam in the living room, and my son, when he was in high school, he was kind of an artist, and he built this Brontosaurus, that's the big, long, horizontal dinosaur, out of chicken wire. So the chicken wire kind of represented the outer shape of the dinosaur. It was very, very accurate. And I said, "Oh, I'm looking at a model of the dinosaur right now."
So the model, or plan, if you can call it that, is his son's school project that had been sitting on a shelf for years. So the Valley News runs a picture of the Brontosaurus model and some quotes from Brian on what he's planning to do.
Brian figures a handful of people will show up as a goof to help out. What he didn't expect was over 100 people coming to be a part of this project.
It's June 3rd, 2010, when construction begins. Brian had a huge tree that had fallen on his property, so he cut the trunk into 4 giant logs that were buried into the ground to form the legs. After that, though, there aren't any formal plans or blueprints, but there are rules.
So the rules were you weren't allowed to measure anything. You had to go to the scrap wood pile, and you'd look and you'd grab a board that you would envision fitting in some place, and then the boards could not be put in level. They had to be on an angle, and you couldn't have them actually vertical plumb. And if somebody put a board someplace and you didn't like the look of it, you couldn't remove their board, but you could embellish it and build over it.
With rules like that, construction moves quickly. 100 people grabbing a piece of wood and hammering it into place at some angle, you can imagine how quickly this process moves along. This goes on for days. A giant creature quickly takes shape.
Brian has an old fire truck in his collection with an aerial ladder, so they use that to help with some of the taller construction. Another volunteer shows up with a telephone company cherry picker truck, so that's used to get to the higher sections. And right on schedule, the project comes together in only 10 days. It's huge. It's incredible. That's when a man pulls his car up to it, steps out, sees this thing in all its splendor, and he says, "Oh my God, it's a Vermontasaurus." The name sticks. Fast. Most folks love it. But there is a problem.
Suddenly, there was one neighbor that knew the buttons to push, and he called the town and complained, and he called this Vermont Act 250 group.
There's always one neighbor, isn't there?
So true. The Vermont Act 250 group, for those of you who don't know, is a law enacted in 1970 designed to keep Vermont rural and beautiful. It limits billboards, development of buildings, and things like that. The complaining phone call to the town was a little more straightforward. The neighbor complained that Brian didn't file a building permit.
And Brian's argument back was a simple one. What are you talking about? This isn't a building. No one's going to live in it, so it's not a building. It's art. Still, authorities need to get involved, and suddenly this giant wooden dinosaur is in danger of going extinct in his first weeks of existence.
It was done. At the 10-day mark, we had the state fire marshal came and looked at it, the state structural engineer, and probably the structural engineer was the only person that had a sensible approach to the whole thing. And he looked at it, and we were going to have picnic tables under it and like a couple of barbecue grills mounted on posts. And he was like, whoa, you can't have the public under this thing. It looks a bit abstract, and how is it really held together, and who built it? And I said, well, we had 5-year-olds and grandpas and everybody working on it. And he says, oh, my God. He says, well, you've got to get a structural engineer to sign it off as being safe. Otherwise, kind of cordon it off.
So Brian places some webbed fencing around the legs of the dinosaur so no one could get underneath the thing. Meanwhile, some pretty cool things start happening with this giant wooden structure.
Like what?
Like all of the crazy shadows and sunlight that move under and around the structure as the sun moves throughout the day, shining through gaps in the wood.
Oh, sure, I could see that.
Or the way birds quickly see this thing as a perfect place to build a nest.
Right. And in order to keep people out from underneath and to protect himself, Brian posts a handwritten note by the dinosaur. It's dated July 7th, 2010. It reads, "Please feel free to stand back and feast on the Vermontasaurus. Just don't go under it or we'll have to tear it down. I'll be fined or I'll go to prison or who knows what the authorities will do. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Brian Boland."
Once the state and the town make their inspections and the Vermontasaurus is ruled a piece of art, the giant wooden beast seems safe, at least for now. A year passes. It's late August of 2011, and the Vermontasaurus is once again facing potential extinction. This time, not from a complaining neighbor or from a state bureaucrat, but from Mother Nature. What's left of Hurricane Irene passes through Vermont with high winds and dumping a lot of water. The following morning, the Vermontasaurus is sagging in the belly. Big time. The idea of taking the wood apart and rebuilding it seems too daunting. So the plan is to embellish it, build around the sagging belly.
There was a guy down in Plainfield, New Hampshire, that had just taken down an old gray barn, and he ran an ad. He was looking for somebody that could possibly use this demolition wood. And the wood was all shattered and everything else. And I went down and looked at it, and I said, dinosaur bones.
Filling in the belly area with the new wood also solves the problem the state has with anybody going underneath the thing. Now that it's built down to the ground, you can't anyway. The Vermontasaurus is here to stay. And that brings us back to today.
Though the Vermontasaurus is the largest wooden beast on the property, it's not alone anymore. There's a series of 5 other smaller wooden dinosaurs that have been constructed over the past decade.
The weird thing about this whole thing is people keep coming to see it. I walk out at 4 o'clock in the morning to get the newspaper in front of the airport, and I look over, and there'll be a car there at 4 in the morning with headlights beaming on this thing, and people out taking photographs of the dinosaur.
The Vermontasaurus. It almost sounds like a Ben & Jerry's ice cream flavor. Today, the giant structure has plenty of bird nests in it, ivy's growing up the legs and body, and now it's 160 feet in length. It's bigger than it ever was before.
Some of the smaller dinosaurs have made their way into local parades. Another was built as a school fundraiser. And Brian even built one that could go out on nearby Lake Fairleigh. So now there's a version of the wooden dinosaur trolling the shores of the lake.
I'm just waiting for some fuzzy pictures of the thing taken from the other side of the lake to, give rise to our next legend.
Yeah, I mean, that could happen.
So there's now a total of 6 dinosaurs on the property. This community art project, made from the scrap of fallen buildings, has endured for over a decade and turned into a roadside oddity and attraction with the Vermontasaurus as its centerpiece. Today, we can think of Post Mills Airport as Vermont's Jurassic Park. We had the pleasure of interviewing Brian Boland on Wednesday evening, July 14th, 2021. The following morning, Brian died in a hot air balloon accident. In addition to being the mastermind behind the Vermontasaurus, he logged over 11,000 hours of balloon flight. We thought the best way to honor this great New England character was to proceed with this story, let you hear his voice, and maybe take a tiny bit of comfort knowing that Brian died doing what he loved. He was 77 years old.
Thank you, Brian, for being so generous with your time and for giving New England the Vermontasaurus and another great story to share.
Ray and I would like to dedicate this episode in his memory. Godspeed, Brian.